happen every week. I am your host, Khalila Riga. I'm a consultant in the anti-trafficking and social justice sector, an accomplished author, national speaker, and the founder and CEO of Khalila Riga Consulting. I'm also a board member of Sidewalk Soldiers, a member of the Survivor Advisory Council for the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking, and a member of Survivor Alliance. I am passionate about educating communities and helping others find freedom from human trafficking. I believe that we all share a responsibility in the fight to do what we can to eradicate this and to bring healing to those that are both free and that are still entrapped. Thank you for joining us on Voices of Change. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another week of Voices of Change with me, your host, Khalila Riga. I'm so excited that you guys are joining me for another week. I hope you guys are staying warm. And this week, as you know, like we've been doing for Human Trafficking Awareness Month, we are just having conversations with both survivors and allies just on the different realities of human trafficking, different intersection points, and just running the whole gamut. So this week I am super excited and it is such a treat. I'm going to be bringing on a very special guest. Her name is Betty Beatty, and she is a wonderful author. She actually is one of the co-authors of the book, The Story of Foster Care Volume 2. So you guys know, right? You guys have to comment that you're here. Make sure you pop in the comments and tell me that you're here. If you enter in there, you will be entered in for the raffle to win a signed copy of the book. So don't forget to do that. Okay, so Betty Beatty, let me tell you about her. So she is a mom, she is a writer, she's a dedicated advocate in the fight against human trafficking and domestic violence. She's a former foster youth and survivor of CSEC. She has overcome homelessness. She now works to elevate lived experience voices in policy and advocacy. With over a decade in human services, she brings expertise in housing, program management, ethical practices in the anti-trafficking field. She holds a bachelor's in political science from Western Washington University and has contributed to organizations like REST, Lifelong, and the YWCA. And she's also, as I said before, the co-author of the book, The Story of Foster Care. So you guys know already out the gate, she's a rock star. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Betty Beatty. Betty,
Hi.
welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So, Betty, I know that we kind of loosely talked about what we wanted to do this week. And part of what we talked about is we wanted to read to the audience a couple excerpts of the book, just our own pieces that we've written, and then just kind of have a conversation around that as far as like what our experiences were, concerning that piece, and then just how that even translates to today and the things that we're doing now. So I know that you had a couple of pieces picked out. Did you have one of the two that you wanted to do first?
I don't know. Let's do Unconditional Love.
Unconditional Love. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of you that do have your book, I hope you brought it. And if you didn't, don't go get it. Just listen to her read it.
I've actually not practiced reading, so.
Okay, well, here we go. Live and in charge.
So, Unconditional Love. So in love you can't see. For the love of money, nobody even notices me. So trapped in a life, I can feel my soul coming for me. The game swallows and traps you into somebody you never thought you would be. Fighting to find the life the game promised me. The game has always provided for me. The game loves me and will never leave. As long as she stays down, she holds her crown. She's the smart woman all these men have always told her to be. Her feelings have already left all parts of her body, and nobody will see that this world has already consumed so much of me, trying to pick up the pieces that belong to me.
You know, that's such a really powerful piece. And I put up the photograph that you took. I'll put it up one more time so that everybody sees. This is in the book, and this is Betty's piece. So I'm hoping everybody can see that. Betty, what was it that happened in this moment when you took this photograph that sparked this this really beautiful poem that you wrote. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was actually driving through Montana and I seen one of those signs that are on the freeway. It was actually though for like, I want to say it was for like car wrecks, like how many people pass through the highway driving. And so it was dark at night, but I turned back around and my son actually thought that I got hit by a car
Oh
when,
no.
because I had to pull over to walk up to get the picture, and it took me a minute and you couldn't see because it was completely dark.
Sure.
But I don't know, I seen that sign and it really sparked to me of like something to be included in the book, because I think a lot of women, not just women, like people that leave human trafficking, it doesn't feel like your life matters because you are trying to get out of convictions. You are trying to get out of a certain mental capacity that you've kind of been trained into. So it just kind of feels like, where does my life matter and at what parts belong to me that I have to pick up?
Yeah.
I think especially experiencing child sex trafficking, it like did a lot of different mental capacities. I don't know how to like really word it, but just a lot of different mental emotions that I didn't know that I had, because like even with the story of foster care, I never utilized my story. I always just try to hide it and not ever speak about it and just
Right.
put it as it was just something that happened to me. And as long as I wasn't involved in it anymore, I could move forward in my own life.
Sure. Yeah. And do you think that that's something that you find in the work that you've been doing? Because you've been doing this work now for quite some time. Do you feel like that's something that most of the clients and people that you've worked with or interacted with, do you feel like that's kind of a general consensus of how they're feeling and what that emotional state is like, and feeling like that they don't matter, or like it was just life and I'm just going to move on?
I would say I've worked with a number of different people that had, some people were further along in their journey, and some people were just coming out of their journey, coming out of the situation. I mean, as we know with trafficking, you can also you can exit in and exit out. Like there's
Right.
different forms of trafficking. Um, but I would say that I've worked with crisis situations, so it is also of working with people that are dealing with addiction, dealing with of not being employed, not having housing, like just looking at all the things that they've already went through, and they have to utilize how to get out of that in order to try to join what society would consider normal.
Right. Yeah, no. And that really speaks to, I think when you and I have spoken together before on panels and stuff, I know we've identified that there's a lot of intersectionalities that we look at, like you were just mentioning with trafficking, right? We have like the house not having a home, we have the poverty factor, not having employment, like all of these barriers that really can kind of, create another perfect storm, if you will, for re-exploitation and re-victimization, right?
Yeah. I mean, I really honestly too think poverty is like a very huge factor in why people are being exploited, especially in our current age right now that we're experiencing such high costs for everything.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's huge. That makes a lot of sense. Um, so so looking at this piece and fast forwarding, because it's been what, a year and change since we've written the book, right? And
Yeah,
really when we
since it was
started the
published.
process, it's been 2 years,
Yeah,
right? Since we started down this road.
yeah.
What do you think has changed for you, if anything, from looking at this piece and where your thoughts were then about things and kind of where we are now?
In my own personal journey,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I would just probably go off the parts of I really don't care what society has to say. Because these are things that I had to overcome. I think the more stigma that society gives for trafficking, I think it keeps people entrapped further into situations. I mean, just like when you have convictions, like nobody wants to go apply for a job when you have prostitution linked to
Sure.
your name. I mean, there's a lot of different aisles that I would say that people have to go down, and a lot of different systems that we have to navigate.
Yeah.
I was arrested when I was a youth. So that it's not blocked, but it still shows up that I was arrested.
Wow.
Um, but I would also say before I did this journey, I've been out of the life for over 20 years. When I started looking at like, why do I think this
Right.
way?
Right. Yes. Yes.
Why do I feel like this?
Yeah.
I'd also already accomplished a lot of different milestones in my own life, especially of getting a bachelor's degree while I was raising 4 kids.
Huge.
Single, I was a single mom. My kids' dad was murdered. I never qualified for any services for help after he was murdered because he didn't work. So my
Wow.
kids were not entitled to Social Security.
Wow.
Um, I mean, that's another downfall that I guess probably some survivors don't think about either, is like when we are dealing with people that are not employed, the different things that affects our kids, like after we exit,
Yeah.
um, that also becomes like a generational trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think parenting when you're out of the life, and even I think, for some of us, like even in my own situation, like I was in and out of trafficking and exploitation while raising a child. And I remember at one point being like out and thinking that I was doing an okay job because, I was keeping her protected and I was, you know, in my mind, doing everything right. But nobody talks about, when you think you've healed from all of these wounds, right? But they all reopen because when you have kids, there's things that trigger, and we're not aware of that. And parenting post the life can look really interesting and scary, and and those generational curses and traumas are a real thing, and they impact our kids for sure. Would you say that you feel like you're in a better place in terms of like this last line that you have of trying to pick up the pieces that belong to me? What do you feel like you're in a better place now in terms of having picked up some of those pieces and walking towards a journey of wholeness?
I wouldn't totally say like a whole different place. I mean, I know what my triggers are now. I know I don't people please anymore. I know when I feel uncomfortable in a situation, I've learned to try to step out of it, not stay in those situations. But it also is just like, it also like the pieces that belong to me is there was so much trauma because it wasn't only due to trafficking. I was also experiencing foster care at the same time, and they
Right.
had removed my daughter from me. So
Wow.
the removal of my daughter when I was the one who was in foster care, and they didn't place us in any housing, because at that time the social workers were always like, there's not places for teenagers.
Right.
So constantly fighting the state to try to get my daughter placed back with me, like always was like how do I like a stigma almost. Like I was
Yeah.
always scared of CPS. Like my whole life, I think I've been scared of CPS, of ever being contacted or ever coming into contact with CPS. And I don't think it was due to me because I was a child and
Hmm.
I didn't ask to be removed from my mom and like placed into the street. Well, the state was also collecting money for me being in state's care.
Wow. Wow. That's such a huge thing. And I think it's probably super eye-opening for a lot of our people that, that are either listening now or that will listen to this later, is really getting an understanding of what that impact looks like when the state does or doesn't step in appropriately or inappropriately, right? Because mistakes are oftentimes made, and that creates a multitude of other situations. And I think there's a lot of areas that people are unaware of, right? I think is the best way to put that. Um, you know, it's interesting that you brought up what state you were in, because you reside in Washington, right? But you were in Montana.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure some people, if they haven't connected that, I'm sure they're like, how'd that happen, right? Because those are two totally worlds apart. But I the reason why I asked that is I want to read a piece of mine that I feel like kind of shows this shift, because it and I want to be cognizant of what I ask you, because I don't want you to overshare, right? But so what was going on between Montana and Washington? How did you end up in two different places?
That is, I moved to Washington actually to escape my abuse.
Okay.
Because now that I have more language, I would like identify my situation as also labor trafficking.
Okay. Wow.
Um, and so before my kids' dad was murdered, he was part of foster care also when he was growing up. But one of my things that I was able to convince him of why I should be able to go to Washington is because the lifestyle that we were caught up in. If I was to get caught, one of the first things that the system did was try to remove kids.
Yeah.
And so by the age of 22, I had 4 kids.
Right.
And so I was able to relocate to Washington
Got
about a year before he was murdered.
Wow. Okay. And I've come across a lot of people who have this idea about where trafficking happens, right? Like when we see it portrayed in the media, we see it, right? Like people are like, oh, it happens here or it happens there. And there's areas where people don't really think, oh, it happens here, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about that a lot. There's a piece,
I'll actually share a story. When I
yeah,
was graduating with my bachelor's, for my senior paper, I wanted to do uh, my paper on trafficking. And at that time, there was not any scholarly information. Everything was on like third world countries.
yeah,
So I couldn't actually use anything that I was finding at that time in the library.
wow,
So I had to switch what I wanted to do my paper on. And I
wow,
mean, I graduated in 2011. So, I mean, there definitely is progress. There definitely is language.
sure.
There's definitely different survivor leaders that are speaking up and like explaining what it's like to try to rebuild your life after you have been exploited.
Yeah, yeah. But what a wild thing, right? Because 2011, because the TVPA Act was in 2000, right? But how much hadn't changed in 11 years that you still weren't able to find what you needed to try to build a paper for, right?
Yeah,
At school.
because I want to say I had to have 3 scholarly authors to quote in that paper, and so that's why. I just didn't want to do it on a third world country because I'm like, this
Sure.
happened right here.
Right.
Like,
Because it happens here. Yeah.
I mean,
100%.
at that time either. I didn't have the language of domestic human trafficking.
Right.
I didn't have that language for me to. I mean, maybe it was my research skills at that time, but I don't think it was. 'Cause
Listen, I know you personally, and your research skills are on point. So, FBI, if you're listening, this girl, you need to hire her. That's all I'm going to say. um, but yeah, there's a piece that I wrote, and I actually read this at my book signing last week. Betty, I know that you're familiar with it. I'm going to read it first, I think. Actually, no, I take that back. I'm going to show you guys the picture first. Hopefully, it is visible enough to everybody. I'm going to try and look and see. So, if everybody can see that, if you're in here in the comments, drop in the comments. Tell me if you're here and if you can see this map. I need everybody to answer before I go forward. If you can see this map, and I'm going to zoom in. Waiting to see if any comments come through, if people can see that pretty well, if they can see the different pins and things. Okay, I don't see any comments yet, so we'll see. But while I'm waiting for those to come through, I'm going to go ahead and start reading. And for those of you that have the book, this is on page 104. And I titled this this piece zip code. Trafficking is not linear, and the intersection of trafficking and foster care is a widely unknown area that is now coming to the surface and being explored. There is so much misinformation about trafficking, and this misinformation can harm the trafficked that desperately need to be identified and given resources. Trafficking looks different based on the culture and the community in which you live. Regardless of the dynamics, one thing is certain: traffickers exploit the vulnerable. When we share only the 1% of potential trafficking recruitment tactics, we're missing the 99% of other ways that traffickers will target vulnerable people and populations. There are 25 types of human trafficking in America alone. From 2007 to 2016, Polaris, which is a huge group, if you don't know who they are, look them up. Polaris analyzed 32,000 documented cases of human trafficking. In the neighborhoods of the cities of the states of North America, and even in other countries, I was exploited and or sold, all underneath the noses of those who I came into contact with, none of which were the wiser because they were ignorant to the signs for which to watch. I'm going to continue that piece in a second. I'm going to pull this map back up so that you guys can see. So I don't know if you guys can see, but do you see all these little pins? You can kind of see these highlighted spots. All of those pins represent a city or state in which I was trafficked or exploited. So when we say it happens here and people think, oh, Montana, but it's so rural, it's so pretty, it's just mountains, it's just nothing. And it happens there too. The 25
I want to jump in on that part. So at that time, also in Montana, like Montana is like a corridor of I-90.
Mm-hmm.
But in that time in my life, there was a number of different pimps that were coming specifically to Montana to recruit girls.
Right. Yeah.
So it was a prime spot for them to locate girls and bring them to travel domestically for sex trafficking.
Right. No, and that's such a point to bring up, Betty, because I think, you know, the majority of people, and I think we've even encountered this in conferences that we've been at, right, that you have people that are just stunned that it happens in rural America, right? Like most of the time people think of trafficking, they think of major cities, they think of, you know, like LA, Vegas, New York, Chicago, Miami. They don't picture in their minds that it's, you know, some little small town that nobody's heard of in middle America, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is it happens there, right? And so the reason I titled this piece zip code is because if you have a zip code, and even if you don't, trafficking is happening there. No one is exempt. Trafficking does not have a profile of a person that it does not apply to, right? Like anybody and everybody can be susceptible or can be at risk. Yes, there are population groups that that can be more at risk than others, but it's not to say that, you know, somebody who came from a, you know, 2-parent family that everybody, you know, from Leave It to Beaverland, right? It doesn't mean that they're not exempt from experiencing that, right? You know, and so I think that's, you know, part of what I always try to share with people. And for those that are watching, again, if you have questions, pop them in the chat. We'll try to answer them live if we can. And if not, you already know the drill. I'll answer you guys afterwards. But, you know, I think that that it's important to note that there's ways to be aware of your surroundings and your communities that you're involved in. And I think that's something that you and I can both speak to, right? You talked about what systems failed you as a youth that didn't recognize what was happening or that recognized something apart, different from what was actually there, right? Like, excuse me. I know for me, there was, systems of that missed things that shouldn't have been missed, right? So we had, um, law enforcement, you have foster, you have the medical system, you have community that you're around, you have schools, you have all of these different systems of people that should be watching and should be paying attention and should, notice when something is off, right? Like, I know we've talked about there's not a checklist for like, this is, if you're seeing this is what trafficking looks like, right? But in your opinion, Betty, what, for the people that are listening and that are, because we know that that's the main question we get, right? Is how do I know what I'm looking at? What am I seeing, right? And what am I not seeing? Because I think people are concerned, well, what if I'm seeing something that's not really there? What would you speak to that?
I mean, I would say it's kind of the same as with domestic violence. It takes a number of different times for people to actually leave the lifestyle, and the more support that you can provide somebody, not saying to them, well, you shouldn't have been doing that, you shouldn't have been down there,
Hmm.
why'd you make that choice?
Yeah.
um, I think can help somebody get out of trafficking faster. um,
Is that some of what did you hear any of that kind of messaging when you were a kid?
well, I mean, even in my aging out paperwork, they actually knew I was being trafficked and also
Wow.
involved in drug trafficking. And so, I
Do you
mean,
mind sharing? Because I
um,
think that's huge for people to know, as you know what I mean? Because we can talk about what it looked like in my end, but I mean, I
well,
want to hear your
I'll,
story.
I'll actually read my aging out paperwork.
Yeah.
So I can't show it to you guys. So it
So, real
actually
quick,
has.
before you start, let me explain what aging out is for those that don't know what that means. So, in the foster care system, not all kids go back home. Not all kids get adopted. Some kids get emancipated. That's not the word. Emancipated, where they can go and file paperwork, right, to be considered quote unquote an adult, that they can be self-sufficient and not have to be a ward of the state anymore. But then there's other kids that they stay a part of the system up until they're 18, and in some states I think now even a little bit older, and then they go out on their own, and that is what aging out means. It means you didn't go back home, you stayed a ward of the state until you could no longer be a ward of the state, and then they just kick you out.
Um, so the paperwork actually has like identification of client, which would be me, and then it has my child. But when you go through the listings, it has my daughter, which her name is Alyssa. Alyssa currently resides with her mother at the home of a paternal step grandmother. Background information, agency involvement. The department became involved with Alyssa at the time of her birth because the department had custody of Betty Jo until the age of 18 and was aware of her instability and lack of parenting skills. Betty Jo grew up with a drug addicted mother and lived in a very chaotic lifestyle. When the department intervened with her mother, Betty Jo refused to live in foster care as she did not like supervision and rules. Therefore, she moved, frequently staying with friends. She quit attending school with a 10th or 11th grade education after the birth of her daughter. Betty Jo was provided with several treatment plans, and she would complete the minimal amount of tasks necessary to be considered successful. Betty Jo is an active member of a gang community in Billings. Although she never has been arrested, she associates with known drug dealers, prostitutes, and other antisocial persons. A man facing homicide charges in California was arrested at her home. The department's child protection concerns were the result of Betty Jo's choices regarding lifestyle and friends and the resulting danger presented to Alyssa. Betty Jo would frequently leave Alyssa with babysitters for days and weeks, which most of the stuff that they're actually listing was not true.
Wow.
She had several sitters, and some of these people would be considered inappropriate by the department. I think being inappropriate by the department also is being left homeless, and having to figure out how to survive. Because anytime I had any kind of association with my mom and they found out, they would remove my daughter from me. Uh,
Wow. And that was
so
because you had already been removed from your mom's care, is that right?
yes, yes.
Okay.
So anytime that they found out that I was associating with my mom, or Alyssa had seen my mom, they would remove her from me, saying that I was putting her in danger.
Did they have just cause for why with your mom, or was that a
Well,
made up story?
with my mom actually. So my mom actually ended up agreeing to terminate her rights. So the attorney that was representing her told her what he would do was, if she agreed to terminate her rights, that he would represent me, so I could get Alyssa back and get CPS out of my life.
Wow.
So the department's child protection concerns were the results of Betty Jo's choices regarding lifestyle and friends and resulting danger presented to Alyssa. Betty Jo would frequently leave Alyssa. I already read that. Sorry. Betty Jo always has spending cash, wore name brand clothes, and traveled out of state frequently, but has never been gainfully employed. The department has received referrals stating Betty Jo was a prostitute and involved in drug trafficking. Neither allegation could be substantiated. And then it goes into like foster care, and it's all the times that they removed my daughter from me. Like it's one, two, three, four different times. Actually, five. One, two, three, four, 5 different times that they
Wow.
removed Alyssa from me in that 3 years. And then it just talks about like the extensions, like why the department was getting the temporary investigation authority. Which also was one of the things when I was going through it, after probably maybe 2 years, I
Hmm.
started to write the judge and tell him what was happening.
Wow.
Um,
So you were advocating for yourself.
yeah, so, and that was, I still don't know if that was like, I mean, I know I did all the things that I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't doing drugs. I never tested positive for any drugs. I mean, I might have drank or whatever, but I wasn't an alcoholic, or like, I was not leaving Alyssa in unstable. I mean, in some aspects, I guess, to certain people, they would consider it unstable, in an unstable environment, depending on
Hmm.
people. But that was actually like, that was my community at the time. It wasn't like I wasn't recognizing abnormal, or like even the
Sure.
word antisocial. Like I still am like, what
Right.
does
Well, you
that
didn't
really
have any
mean?
guidance because how old were
Yeah.
you at this time?
Well, when I first had my daughter, I was 15, and I
Wow.
finally got her back 2 weeks before I gave birth to my second daughter, at 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
So between 15 and 19, they were expecting a teenager to have the frame of mind to understand what's stable, unstable, safe, antisocial, all of these laundry lists of things that they were telling you.
Yes.
And wow, without any guidance. That's brilliant. I
Yeah.
love that. I'm so sorry for I'm you know, I know that I know a lot of your story, but it never ceases to impress me that you were able to have the wherewithal, despite your situation, to advocate for you and to advocate for your daughter. That's such a huge thing. And I think a lot of survivors, or those that were active, go through these moments of self blame and of feeling like they just failed, right? And when we go through the list of the shoulda, coulda, would haves, but I just want to say that for those that feel that way, you don't have to feel that way. My husband always likes to remind me, and I like to share this with others, that we were doing the best that we could with the tools that we had, and we were doing our best to keep our kids alive and to provide for them in the only ways that we knew how, when we didn't have maybe the best examples. So kudos to you for pushing through and for advocating and for being able to do that. That's
Well,
huge.
it also just goes to show, though, I've worked with a number of different women that have actually lost their children due to being exploited and
Sure.
experiencing trafficking, and they never got to rekindle anything with their children again. And
Wow.
it wasn't because they're bad parents; it's because also the system was looking at them at the same time of like, you're not fixable, like you're, nothing about you and your family is is great, so we're going to place them somewhere else. But even in my situation, they
Yeah.
didn't. The only time that they ever tried to place me was when I gave birth to Alyssa. My social worker showed up and said, I could go with Alyssa to an unwed mother's home, or I could go do my own thing. Which the prior week, the week before I gave birth, she had came to the house I was staying at. I was renting a room from somewhere and had told me I was going to be able to come home. Everything was going to be fine. I had clothes. I had everything I needed. And then she shows up at the hospital and says, like, you can go with her or you can go do your own thing.
Wow.
But I also don't think at that time that they were expecting me to fight. I think they were expecting me to kind of just back down and like let everything happen. And I don't know why I just kept trying to pursue getting her back and like looking at different things of like, even with writing the judge, that I was like, how is this fair? Like, what do you guys want? I don't understand what you want me to do. How do you want me to
Sure.
maneuver through this?
Sure. Yeah. No. And so that really leads into this other piece, because I want to make sure we close with your last piece. I don't want to be the one closing out my last piece. So, because you're talking about the foster care system and the options and the feelings of like, you can do this or you can do that, and kind of the bouncing around, right? That we see a lot.
Yeah.
So there's another piece that I wrote called Not Your Property. So I'm going to show the picture of that so that everybody can see. And by the way, for those that don't know, the photographs and different things that you see or art pieces that you see created are things that were created by the authors in the book. They were not generated by anybody else. So let that also serve again as a reminder. If you have not dropped in the comments and you want to be entered into that raffle, do it now. Don't delay. Okay, so let me move forward. So Not Your Property. While my husband and I were going through the classes to become foster parents, I heard this question come up repeatedly. Can we choose what child we get? The response verbalized to us was yes, that it was possible. Then that same response was confirmed in the form of a questionnaire. We were asked to choose things such as race, age, gender, personal background, level of difficulty, etc., etc. And then they went one step further in communicating that if it doesn't work out with that child, you can tell them, you can call to have them removed from your home in a different placement. We'll just get you another kid. Instantly, I was flooded with all of the memories of my own experiences within the foster care system as a young girl. The countless homes and the constant message of not being good enough. There's a striking correlation between our youth and foster care to the world of sex trafficking. In both realms, we see the commodification of youth in foster care and of adult trafficking victims. We should each feel accountable to stand up for those who are being oppressed. We are not property. We are not for sale. We are not property. And I think it's critical to make that awareness for those that don't know that if you're going into foster care to complete your family, that is not the purpose of foster care, right? That's not what purpose it serves. If you're going in there for that, just bounce, because what happens to youth in foster care is they get this messaging, even if you don't audibly say it, and Betty, I don't know if you ever felt this, but of that you were too much, or that you weren't enough, or that you were too problematic, or you were too angry. And like there was all of this constant things that you were trying to meet to just feel loved and to feel wanted and to feel like you belong somewhere. And I think when we look at adult victims of trafficking, that's kind of the same messaging, I think, that we see happen, of you're still just trying to belong somewhere and just do whatever it takes to survive and to have those needs met, right? We all have the need of wanting to be loved, of wanting to be cared for, of just those instinct, those things that we're born with that we just want. And when we go through a system like that, and then we come out as adults, and if we haven't gotten that healing, then we still have this same thing, and we find ourselves as adults still kind of going through the same cycle, right?
Yeah, repeating the same.
Repeating the same.
Yeah.
It's a nasty little a nasty little thing,
Well, I mean, even when you look at domestic violence is so intertwined depending on the type of pimp or what exploiter. I'm just going to say exploiter because it doesn't necessarily have to be a pimp.
Sure. Yeah. Just an
Depending on what
abuser
kind
in
of,
general.
yeah, exploitation that you're experiencing. So like you just keep kind of like, I mean, I was in a very abusive relationship that everybody thought I was going to get killed. Like he was going to kill me.
Yeah.
And I was always scared to go to the system because I also did not want to have them try to remove my kids from me
Sure.
because I was in abuse.
Right. Yeah. And you'd already experienced what that system
Yeah.
could, would, or didn't do as a
Yeah.
youth, and to try to navigate that again as an adult, I'm sure had to be a terrifying thought.
Well, even one incident, I was involved in a raid. At 18, they were
Mm.
raiding two houses that were back to back, and I guess I'll elaborate a little bit. My mom was actually at the jail and overheard the police talking about what they were doing, and she knew it was the house that me and my sister were at. She
Wow.
called my brother. My brother rode his bike, which he was 16 at the time. He rode his bike over to this house, and I'd say it was probably at least 6 miles. Came in right before the house was raided. They shot the dog. They threw different bombs in the house,
Wow.
but came in, said they're on their way. You guys are getting raided right now. I just passed 2 blocks full of police, and I grabbed my nephew because it was a trap house.
Yeah.
Grabbed my nephew, and I had a friend that lived around the corner, and I just took off running.
Right.
My
For
sister
those
stayed with
that
the.
don't know, what's a trap house?
I mean, there's a lot of different explanations of trap
What's
houses, but
what's the overall version that we can tell people for those that don't know?
so I'll say that trap house was we were frequently selling drugs out of the front house and the back house,
Okay.
and that trap house actually had gotten blown up. There was a number of individuals that had been selling out of that house, not just for the person like the main supplier, but they were also making their own money off of it. So that house had pretty much got blown up. Like had the cops were like, no, we need to hit these houses.
Yeah, got it. Yes. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just
No,
figured
it's
there's might be people listening who are
yeah.
like, what's that?
Um, I mean, so at some aspects too, that it was like, I mean, if my mom went to bed at the jail that morning and like my brother coming over there and actually making it there before, like I have to
Sure.
question like whether we would have made it out of there.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah. So I mean, I think that really leads into your last piece that you were going to read for us tonight, right? Which was getting out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to show everybody the picture. I'm going to hold it up while you read.
Okay. So getting out. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Desperate times call for desperate measures. When you keep finding yourself struggling to just sustain life once again, the lingering stigma of your family history, patronizing circumstances of just trying to get ahead. The right to choose, your mind is racing, spiked with anxiety and desperation. Being overwhelmed by new decisions, you fear you're not meeting your obligations. The uncontrollable emotions that come from being without, constantly reminding you could hit just one more lick. Just trying to be optimistic. It is a constant pull, one foot in, one foot out. The glamour and incitement, the distraction and delight that you get from not being reminded of your poverty and instability. The fear of an ordinary life, of being powerless over your circumstances. The enticements you got from bands touching your hands. In the scheme of life, it's tempting to jump right back in. The large sums of money can reel you right back in. Money in hand makes believe that I can get out.
So talk to us about that piece. What what was that? What was that like? What was that like for you getting out, and what have you seen and how that translates to even others getting out, and the temptation and the pull to go back?
I mean, I would say just the amount of money that you're making, and when you go to trying to work a job in society, it really is a continuing reminder of like instability and poverty. And when you are used to touching that type of money, it is a really constant mind altering experience
Sure.
because now you're navigating minimum wage jobs, employment opportunities that you are being tokenized with, not with like the actual encouragement of like you can overcome this, like you can get into a different position.
Mm.
I worked a lot of retail jobs before I went back to school, and
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the reasons I went to school, because I wanted to be a part of my kids' lives and not like work till 10 o'clock at night and manage people and do those different things. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go get an education,
Yeah.
which that took me 6.5 years because I was also raising my 4 kids at the same time.
Wow. That's huge to have that. I don't want to say I envy you, but I remember, but in some ways, I remember thinking that I wanted to try my hand at going to school because I just wanted something different. But life didn't go that way, and life just lifed and did its thing. And I found myself doing the opposite of being in one job after another, just trying to make it work and then trying to hide what might have been on my record, and trying to find a way to stay out once and for all, and not end up in these positions where you feel like you almost have to go back because you can't just seem to make it in a square job, right? Like
Well, yeah,
it's
it's
rough.
like it really is. It's like it is a complete mind altering experience, and like especially when you are scared of a system that like you were already blamed for your poverty, and then you have kids and you're like, how do I make sure that if they show up at my doorstep, that they're not going to remove my kids just because I'm poor.
Right, right. No, and that's such a huge thing. And I think in looking at our current climate and things that are going on, not that it's necessarily related to trafficking, but when we think about things that present themselves as vulnerabilities and as situations, my husband and I, we were in North Carolina after the hurricanes came. And there's a lot of families that are displaced because they lost their homes, they lost everything. And the only option they have is to live in a tent. And if they leave their land and if they condemn the house, then they lose the property, but they're still expected to pay taxes on the property, but the jobs are gone. And they're trying to figure out how to do things. And from my understanding, the state is coming in and saying, well, you don't have a stable place for you and your kids. So we're going to take your kids, even though you lost your home due to a natural disaster and there's no help coming in. We have these situations, these circumstances that are being created that really make people susceptible to being targets, to being trafficked. And then we have that, entering into the system. That's a scary thing for a kid, especially when you're talking about children who've not had a negative childhood experience, who've got, what we would call, what you and I would deem as a healthy, family. To take somebody out of that and throw them into the foster care system can be really scary because you're coming in contact with situations and stories and people that this is night, it's a whole nother planet to you, really.
Yeah.
And
Well, especially when you think about, I mean, this is my experience with just different organizations, but when you are working with people that are in crisis,
mhm,
they usually do not have the capability of looking up what rules are, like looking up the different things that like organizations are actually supposed to be providing for you, but they are not doing what they're saying that they're supposed to be doing.
right,
So it's like you're fighting all these different demons in certain ways of just trying to get your voice heard and trying to get help
yeah,
for a circumstance that you did not create. And
right,
like especially altering in crisis, like not a lot of people have the capacity to sit down and be like, "Oh, I'm going to sue this place," or "They're
yeah,
doing me like this," or "They're doing me like that," and they're not supposed to. And like so many people discredit survivors' voices of them speaking up about situations that they've actually endured, that it is like a continuing cycle that your voice is restricted in so many ways, and
sure,
it is your family, like your livelihood. There's so many different things that it's like you're supposed to be out here helping create help, not making things more difficult for people to alter and figure out like why you're targeting them.
Right, exactly. No, and that kind of, touches on, I had Miriam on the show last week, and she's a wonderful ally in the anti-trafficking and foster care space. And that's kind of a little bit of what we talked about is this, organizations and how are they doing things wrong? How are they doing things right? What can they do better? So, just in our moving towards wrapping up, we've got a few minutes left. I want to speak on that just a little bit with you because you've been in this space for such a long time. What are some things that you feel like for organizations that may listen or may find this, years from now, we'll say, what are some things that they can do better to make sure that situations like what happened with you, whether it be as a youth, whether it be trying to get out, whether it be working in the sector, what are some things that are misses and things that they can do better?
I would say believing survivors first.
Yeah.
Not asking us to join boards and task force just to check a box that you have a survivor on your board or in your organization.
Right.
I mean, I know we have higher rates of PTSD than a lot of other people. I'm not asking for like organizations to alter all the way around of their employment responsibilities, but like to look at different effects. I mean, actually getting to know a survivor. But I've also seen that backfire also of trying to create I wouldn't say relationship, but a friendship with a survivor leader that it
Hmm.
inflicted some really mentally disabling things that happened to me with a survivor leader here in Washington and put like
Wow.
backtracked me in a lot of different ways. And it still is something that I am altering through right now. And I mean, everybody has their right to their own defense, but it also is like if you are a leader and you know that you messed up, take accountability. Like nobody's perfect. We're just
Sure.
trying to make it better for the people that are trying to get out of these situations. Like 20 years ago, this organizations weren't around to help trafficking victims. Like we
Sure.
want it to be a better place for them not to have to experience exploitation or being utilized as like just saying, "Oh, well, I have survivors in my staff." Like, and you're
Sure.
not listening to what we're saying.
Right. No, and I completely agree with you. There's a handful of places that maybe not a full handful, less than a handful, thankfully. And I say thankfully because I know there's a vast amount of organizations. So, for me to say that there's a few that I've encountered that, is similar to what you've talked about, that there's the ticking the box of, okay, well, now we can say we have this in place, but there's not the wraparound for that survivor leader that you're bringing in and addressing and making sure that how are we best taking care of our staff, right? And that doesn't just apply to us, but even for their own staff, like how are we making sure that everybody's being taken care of and that we're not tokenizing and that we're not making mistakes off of the backs of those that are trying to wade themselves out of the muck that they're in. When we look at like aftercare facilities, when we've got people that are living in these places and we have organizations that are just willy-nilly making a whole bunch of changes and things and not taking into account how that affects and how that re-triggers and how that re-traumatizes, right?
Yeah.
um, and all of that. So those are huge things. So what words of wisdom, what impartations would you like to leave with our audience today in the bulk of everything we've talked about, and even if we didn't talk about it?
I would say like just the experience of working with empty frames and using photography and actually writing things like really helped me in a process of trying to process different trauma that I had experienced that had came back up that I thought I had already resolved.
Yeah.
Um, for communities to look more into actually helping kids and not utilizing them as a way of making ends meet. Um, I mean, we have a number of kids that don't have homes. We have a number of people that don't have homes, and like no matter what, people's family is their family. I'm not saying that you have to accept them into your home, but like our foster care is at a high in crisis of not just the state removing people because of poverty, but there's not homes to provide for kids. And when kids don't have places to go, the streets will keep calling. The streets are always going to be there.
Wow. That's such a powerful thing that you said. And I hope that for those that are listening, that maybe don't have this experience, or maybe they're curious about foster care, and maybe even if you're not, but if you know someone, if you go to a church, if you have a community you belong to, think about that when it comes to foster care and trafficking, right? If we don't take care of our youth, the streets are more than happy to come in and pick them up. And I agree with that sentiment, just from the standpoint of, I think that we would have less victims of trafficking as adults if we had better wraparound and better protection of our youth, right? I think that's, I think if the right people stepped in, if they got trained properly, and if they did the right things, we could make a better, a deeper impact, we'll say, than what we've seen. So, if you have a heart for it, as I say this often, you don't have to have the experience of foster care. You don't have to have the experience of trafficking, of whatever it is, fill in the blank, to have a heart for it, right? And you can want to do the right things, but you can do them the wrong way. So, if you
But
have
none
a
of us
heart
are,
for it,
and none of us are perfect though either. Like
no.
it's just taking accountability for the things of being like, oh, I didn't see it like that. I didn't. I mean, accountability is a very big step for humans to
Yes.
start accepting.
Yeah, absolutely. No. So I think those are the things, right? So if you have a heart for it, get trained, do it the right way, be accountable, take ownership. It's okay. We're all going to screw up, we're all going to mess up. But if we all learn to lean into each other and learn from each other's experiences, I think that's how we grow. And I think that's how we really make impact.
I'd agree.
Yeah. Well, Betty, thank you so much again for being on the show. I deeply appreciate all of the wisdom that you shared, and your willingness to be raw and authentic and vulnerable, and things that maybe you hadn't planned on.
I
I know
wasn't.
that it's scary when you don't know who's listening, and everybody out there in La La Land, thank you for tuning in. So I just want to again thank you for being on the show. Thank you to everybody that tuned in tonight. Make sure you have dropped in the comments, Betty, if people want to learn more in your state, is there some way that they can contact you? Are there organizations that you would throw out there as we close?
I would not throw organizations right now in my
Okay.
state.
That's fair. If somebody wants to reach out to you because they
um,
are looking for something, or they want advice, or maybe they need somebody to come speak and to train their people, how do they reach you?
I am on LinkedIn, Facebook,
Okay,
Instagram, and I believe my website is still up. I just haven't been on there for a while.
that's fair. What is your website? Is it bettybeatty.com?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
bettybeatty.com.
bettybeatty.com. We're
Wait,
going to throw,
it's Betty at bettybeatty.com. That's what it is.
is that what it is? Okay, we're
Yeah.
going to throw that so that everybody can see it into the thingamabob. Hold on. I'm trying to get the screen to work, but technology and I are not always really good friends. Uh,
Me
I
neither.
typically call technology a bad boyfriend. So that's that's my thoughts on it. So you said it was Betty at
At bettybeatty.com.
Betty at Betty
Beatty.
Sorry, my fingers were not typing what I wanted. I was like, that doesn't look right. .com.
Yes.
Okay. Let me add it. Let me pretend that I know what I'm doing. There it is. All right. So that is how you reach Betty. And you can reach her on LinkedIn. You can reach her on Facebook. And you said also on Instagram, right?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, Betty, thank you once again. Everybody else, make sure you dropped in the comments. And if you didn't, I don't know what to tell you. But I'll be doing the live drawing hopefully on Monday. And I will keep you guys posted. That is all for tonight. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for joining us, Betty. Have a great night, everybody.